Describe the lesson.
One of the lessons, I specifically wanted to teach students how to argue, because that helps to distill your thoughts and organise your thoughts, and it helps learners, amongst as well as anybody else, that's how I was going to put this. It helps learners to, in a scientific situation, you may do an experiment, get some results. Those results, as far as you're concerned, support a particular hypothesis that you may well have. And there's that famous expression that, look at my results, don't they just speak for themselves?
Right.
And of course they don't, because at the end of the day, if you are a professional scientist, or if you're trying to convince somebody that your misconception is wrong and this one is what you should be actually trying to get your head around, the data doesn't speak for itself. You actually need quite persuasive language. You need to think about how you're going to construct your language to try and convince the person you're talking to. So we use Tolman's argument pattern as a tool to help you condense and distill the main claim, the data which you're going to be using to support this claim, and then what we call the warrants, or the justifications, where you sort of weave and tie together the data with your explanations to support and back up the claim. And the Tolman argument pattern is a very, very simple construct which helps you to organise your thoughts and make your claim, or makes your results as persuasive as possible. Because science isn't just about doing experiments or analysis, and it's as much as about trying to convince people that this is how we should look at the data. There are, after all, results can be interpreted in so many different ways. Whose interpretation wins through at the end of the day? And this gets to the heart of how science works. And argumentation is one method for how you sort of going about fulfilling that.
So how did you plan that lesson?
How did I plan the lesson? The planning was quite drawn out. First of all, this was the lesson was all to do with climate change and global warming. So this was a contemporary area of science where there's a lot of controversy and debate, and so you're right at the forefront of the scientific world. You're not having to look at areas of science which are very much established and in place. There's maybe not room for argument there, but there's plenty of room for argument in climate change. Now the challenge, though, was some of the arguments for the fact that the Earth is warming due to human beings are really highly technical arguments. And if I wanted to teach students how to argue, one of the challenges was actually getting over the technical aspects. So I decided to provide them, in the form of laminated cards, all the knowledge they needed. It's not watered down, but in an accessible form for them. So I had to make some cards, first and foremost, and those cards were claims. Some of them were data in forms of graphs, results tables, things like that. And there was a little bit of explanation which could be used, if they wanted to sort of link the data to the original claim. That global warming is nothing new, it's always happened before. What's your evidence for that? Well, look at this graph, it shows temperature changing all the time. Here's a little bit of explanation. So the outlay of time there was quite time consuming with putting those resources together. But I also wanted, because of my passion for climate change, I wanted the students to know as many different arguments as possible for and against. So in the time available, how can I get the students to be aware of all these different arguments? And so I decided to go for a marketplace activity. This is kind of Paul Guinness. Paul Guinness is an educational researcher and goes around schools and he advocates this marketplace activity where a group of students will learn the facts that they've been given on these laminated cards and familiarise themselves with all the main arguments. And then later on, the group will disband and one person who remains behind will be the teacher, and the people who disband will go and learn about the other climate change arguments with other groups going on around the classroom. And so they will listen to the arguments from the teachers in the other tables, and that might take about 20 minutes or so to learn maybe 2 or 3 other climate change arguments, the pros and the cons. And then they come back and they basically share their ideas with each other. And the teacher, of course, because the teacher's been teaching all this time, it's now the teacher's turn to become like the learner, and they learn from the people that when they're out in the marketplace, the teacher will then also learn those arguments. So that's the essence of a marketplace activity. And of course the incentive that they should go and teach and learn as best they can is they're going to have a big debate at the end of the lesson, where you're going to have the 2 opposing climate skeptics and the climate proponents, and they're going to debate. And the chairperson, which will be myself, will throw open an open-ended question. So what is the evidence that climate change is anthropogenic? And the debate that actually ensued was absolutely fantastic. A bit slow coming off the ground, but the whole team were aware of all the arguments. Not only had they specialised in their own argument, but in their marketplace activity, they learned about the arguments as well that were being expounded. So the lesson plan, the planning was quite challenging, because there was lots of different activities which had to be carefully orchestrated by myself. I could keep going on if you like. I mean, it's a huge, in-depth lesson plan. Yeah. So it began with the objectives being set out. That I'd like you to be aware of the main climate change arguments, pros and against. This is a great opportunity for you to learn how to construct an argument as persuasively as possible. Those were the 2 main objectives. And thirdly, that science is controversial. So they would learn about all that. Like I was saying before, the main challenge was all the technical aspects. So I did spend about 20-25 minutes doing a bit of a PowerPoint presentation myself, just going through the main pros and the disagreements to do with climate change. So that's kind of traditional didactic bit of question and answer. Before they then split into their own groups. And once they were in their groups, that's when they were presented with the cards. And so that's a climate skeptic argument. They were colour coded, so they knew exactly which cards were climate skeptic arguments, which were climate proponent arguments. And in those groups, you had 3 people on this side face off with 3 people on this side. And to start with, there were hushed whispers. Yeah. These are the arguments here. They weren't aware of what the counter arguments were going to be, and so they were given about 5 minutes to become familiar with that before the argument began. And it would always be the climate skeptic, just the way it worked, I'm afraid, that would come up with a claim. And they were encouraged not to sort of just say, "Oh, read that card." They were encouraged to argue their case in their own words. And once the climate skeptics had used data and warrants to support their claim, and they could argue no further, they would lay their cards out in a toll argument pattern. So the other team could, because they might not have understood everything that was said, and they might have forgotten some of the things that were said, so they could at least see the essence of what the main arguments were, before then the proponents would try and build their counter argument. And again, they would use the Tolman argument pattern, verbalising in a way, to try and come up with a counter argument. And when they're spent, when they can't talk anymore, they think they've said what they could say, they would lay their main arguments out in the form of argument pattern for the other team to have a look at. And then it was a free-for-all. So they would sort of synthesise each other's claims and explanations and try and undermine it, either by reiterating or re-emphasising aspects of the data which the other team hadn't actually taken account of, or better still, being really creative and finding and other angles at which they could try and make their arguments as persuasive as possible. And that exchange, that free-fall, would maybe go on for about 5-10 minutes before then the marketplace activity would come into place, where they go and learn about all the arguments, because these arguments were going on in different areas of the room,
Right.
completely different climate change arguments taking place, and then kicks in the marketplace activity, which I've already talked about.
Right. So how do you think it went then overall?
Well, at the end of the day, the learning was absolutely active, passionate as well, which is the be all and the end all of what a teacher's trying to orchestrate here. So the teacher is managing the lesson, but the vast majority of learning going on during that activity of argumentation is what I would call horizontal. So nothing authoritative coming from me at that point. That's like vertical interactions. So, and they're more willing to listen to their peers and to challenge their peers than to challenge somebody in authority like myself. So the learning was some of the best learning I've ever seen in a classroom. I mean, it was piloted with the Year 10 group and the Year 11 group, and it's been perfected with the Year 12 classes. It was originally written this resource for Year 12 because, like I was saying, the arguments are rather technical. And I thought at the time only Year 12 students would be able to understand it. But it's actually working really well with some bright Year 10 and Year 11 groups too. So I think job done if they are really, really enthused and passionate.